What's the strangest or funniest thing you've heard from a stranger in a public place? It was one of those days when all I wanted was a bit of peace, good coffee, and a chance to disconnect from the world for a few minutes. I decided to pop into my favorite cafe nearby. A cozy, almost homey place where the barista knows your name and your taste, so they don't even ask what drink you want. My routine is simple. I usually order a double espresso, grab a book, or scroll through my phone while they make my coffee. You know, it's Saturday. I settled into my favorite corner table and was just starting to enjoy the moment when I noticed a man at the next table who caught my attention. At first, there was nothing unusual, just a typical office worker in a suit. But the suit, although expensive, looked like it had been worn non-stop for several days. His hair was messy, his face pale, and he had dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept in a week. Finally, my double espresso was ready, and I took my first sip when this man suddenly turned to me, locked eyes for a moment, and leaned in sharply. He looked at me as if I had just burned down his apartment or something and whispered, "Do you work for them?" I was totally unprepared for this turn of events. The first thing that popped into my mind was, maybe he's mistaking me for someone else? I lifted my eyes from the cup and smiled slightly. For who? The man glanced around as if someone might be listening to our conversation and leaned in even closer. His voice dropped to a near whisper but sounded incredibly serious. "The government. I know you work for them." My cup froze halfway to my mouth. At first, I thought it was some kind of prank or joke, but his expression was so serious that it dispelled any doubts about humor. He genuinely believed it. I tried to find a response that would convince him that I was absolutely not involved in any secret operations. "No, man, I'm just here drinking coffee. I don't work for anyone." But he didn't even flinch. His gaze became even more suspicious, like a detective unraveling a crucial case. "Oh, sure. I remember thinking that once too. But then everything changed. I was a spy, worked for a secret service, saw things you can't even imagine. They control everything, news, politics, even the weather." Now it was starting to sound like a movie script. But the problem was, he looked utterly serious. All his movements, his expressions, everything indicated that he believed his words 100%. They knew everything about me. "My real name isn't what you see on my passport. I've seen the true faces of these people. They live among us, controlling everything we do. You think you live in the real world? You're mistaken. It's all a big game, and they hold all the chips." At this point, I was beginning to doubt that this was just a strange prank. The man spoke with such a tone, as if he had just escaped from some underground bunker where he had been held for years. Something in his eyes indicated that he was definitely not joking. I felt a bit scared. And honestly, when someone in an expensive but wrinkled suit tells you he has seen the true faces of these people, you start to wonder, maybe I really have stumbled into some paranoia without even realizing it? But here's where it got really strange. He suddenly paused, looked at me, and lowered his voice as if invisible cameras were surrounding us. "I have to go. They might find out that I said too much. If they learn I revealed this to you, they'll find me." He quickly grabbed his half-finished coffee, tossed a few coins on the table, and literally ran out of the cafe, leaving me sitting there with a complete sense that I had just witnessed something bizarre. And maybe even dangerous. You know, after that, I went to that cafe a few times, but I kept looking around, as if expecting something odd. Every time, I checked if there were any spies nearby or anyone who might be watching me. At first, I thought it would pass, but a strange part of me still wonders. What if he was right? It was just an ordinary commute home from work. As usual, I was half asleep when I boarded the minibus. Music was playing in my ears, and I was gazing thoughtfully out the window, only thinking about getting home quickly to have dinner and crash on the couch. Nothing unusual. The minibus wasn't crowded, just a few passengers in the front seats and a couple at the back. As always, everyone was quietly going about their business. At one of the stops, someone sat down next to me, but I didn't immediately notice because I was absorbed in my music. Suddenly, I began to hear some strange rustling and hissing. At first, I thought it might be a bad track or something wrong with my headphones, but the sound wasn't coming from them. I slightly turned my head and saw something completely unexpected. A man, probably around 40, was sitting next to me, holding a lizard. Yes, a real, large lizard. It was calmly sitting on his lap like a pet, not particularly bothered by the fact that we were in public transport. He noticed my surprised look and, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, said, "Don't worry, this is Jessie. She's nice." Well, I immediately had 1,000 questions in my head, but the first one that popped out was, is it even legal to have a lizard on a minibus? He just smirked and replied, "If no one's noticed, then yes." I couldn't help but smile. The situation was so absurd that it felt like part of some surreal movie. Here was a man with a lizard in his hands, completely confident in his rightness, as if this was his regular commute, and I was the only one who didn't get it. So I decided to play along with his mood and relax a bit, although the thought still lingered in my mind. What the heck is going on here? He continued the conversation as if we were old friends. "You know, I have a whole zoo at home, not just Jesse." He began to speak so passionately that I genuinely started to think this guy loved his animals more than anyone else. "I also have a snake, 2 spiders, a hedgehog, and even some aquarium fish. When they're all together, it's a whole show. I even thought about starting a YouTube channel, but then I figured they deserve a quiet life without all the hype." I looked at him and thought that he was either the most colorful passenger I had ever met, or he seriously knew something about life that I hadn't figured out yet. He continued, "For example, hedgehogs are my favorites. They're so cute, but sneaky. You know, people always think that socks disappear in the house because of gnomes or the washing machine. But it's actually the hedgehogs. They quietly creep up and drag socks into their burrow. I've lost several pairs that way." I paused for a second, trying not to laugh. What kind of sock-stealing hedgehogs are these? This couldn't be serious, right? But the man looked so convinced and confident in his assertion that I couldn't help but think, what if? Then he decided to share some philosophical thoughts about his spiders. "Oh, spiders are a whole different story. They just watch you. You walk around the house, and they sit on their webs thinking, this guy is way more interesting than TV. Sometimes I feel like we're their reality show." This part made me chuckle, but I didn't show it, as he clearly took everything he said seriously. Overall, I was starting to enjoy the situation. While others at work talked about their cats or dogs, this guy was sharing stories about lizards and spiders. I even asked him, "How does your family feel about your zoo?" He just shrugged. "Oh, I don't have a family. Actually, they are my family. They're better than people. They never argue and they don't bug you with questions. You just live and everyone's happy." The man got off at the next stop, leaving me in the minibus with the thought, what just happened? And honestly, now, every time I get on a minibus, I can't help but wait for someone to sit next to me with a lizard or some other exotic pet. Weird people in public transport are always a surprise, but this guy with his pets will definitely stay in my memory forever. I was sitting on a crowded bus, heading home after work, when I noticed 2 elderly men sitting next to each other. One of them looked very serious, as if he was trying to solve some life-altering question. He said to his friend, "I'm 100% sure it's aliens. Just think about it. Where did all these technologies come from in the last 50 years? Phones, the internet, GPS, all of that couldn't have just appeared on its own. We're not that smart." His friend was quiet at first, but then slowly shook his head and replied, "Oh, come on, it's obvious. Technology isn't from aliens. It's all from cats. They've been controlling us for thousands of years. We just didn't need that much technology before, because we spent less time at home. But now that we do, the cats want us to handle everything else for them." At that point, I seriously started to doubt that this was really happening. But then they continued discussing the theory about how cats started teaching humans to create computers to automate work, and now they just calmly observe us through cameras. It was so ridiculous that I could barely keep myself from bursting out laughing. The men were seriously debating a cat conspiracy theory, while everyone around acted as if nothing unusual was happening. I'm standing at the train station, waiting for my train, when a man with a huge suitcase sits down next to me. The suitcase looks so old and worn out that it would fit right into a spy movie. He glanced around as if checking to make sure no one was nearby, then sighed and suddenly leaned in towards me. "You wouldn't happen to know how to smuggle a mummy across the border, would you?" he asked with a completely serious expression on his face. I tried to process his words, thinking it was a joke, but he seemed way too nervous to be joking. So, I nervously smiled and replied, A mummy? Is this a joke?" He shook his head. "No, seriously, it's a family heirloom. My great-grandfather collected it during an expedition back in the early 1900s. Now I have to lug it around with me. I just hope customs doesn't think I'm a smuggler." At that moment, I had no idea if this was some elaborate prank setup or if the man was really carrying a mummy in that old suitcase. I tried to act like this was the most normal day of my life and carefully said, "Well, maybe you could try declaring it as an antique." He thought for a moment, then nodded with a smile. "Sounds like a good idea. thanks, that might just work. And he headed towards the train, leaving me with the feeling that I had just advised someone on how to smuggle a mummy across the border. One time, I was riding the subway as usual, reading a book, when a man in a very strange silver suit sat down next to me. I thought it was probably some sort of cosplay because otherwise he looked way too odd. He stared at me intently and said, "Are you ready for the mission?" Naturally, I asked, "What mission?" "We're assembling a team to defend Earth from an alien invasion," he said with a completely serious face. "You look like someone who can fight." I don't know why, but I decided to roll with this madness and replied, "What kind of aliens? What are their weaknesses?" He thought for a moment, then whispered, "They can't stand sarcasm, so your weapon is irony. The more sarcastic comments you make, the better our chances of defeating them." We spent the next 5 stops having a serious discussion about strategies for defending the planet. He was so convincing that at one point, I started to wonder if this was some kind of social experiment. But no, he just got off at his stop, said, "We'll be in touch," and disappeared into the crowd. It was the weirdest situation I've ever been in. I was on the subway, and the man sitting next to me was actively writing something in his notebook. After a few stops, he suddenly turned to me and said, "Dude, do you love kebabs?" That unexpected question threw me off guard, but I replied, "Well, yeah, who doesn't love them?" He nodded seriously, opened his notebook and showed me, "Look, here's my secret marinade. All the ingredients are here, but there's one trick. You have to add beer at the very end, just before you put it on the grill. No one knows this, but it makes the flavor perfect." I nodded, trying not to laugh, and he continued, "It's a family tradition. My grandfather did it, my dad did it, and now I do. But you can try it, just don't tell anyone." I started to think that this was where it would end, but suddenly he opened his bag, and there was kebab, right in the subway between the two of us. He pulled out a plastic container, raised it up, and said, "So, what do you think? You love kebabs, right?" I sat there, bewildered, while he smiled and handed me a small plastic fork, adding, "Aren't you going to try it? This is my masterpiece. I've been perfecting it for the last 10 years. Naturally, I couldn't refuse, even though I realized how strange it looked to be eating kebabs on the subway. But I took a piece, and honestly, it was really tasty. "If you're not married yet, take note, my friend," he added, and we both laughed. He got off at the next station, leaving me in complete shock, but in a good mood, with a little piece of kebab in my hand. Now I always make sure to bring my portion of beer before grilling. Once I was hurrying to work and passed through the turnstile at the subway when I saw an older man struggling to get through. His card wasn't working. He looked confused, and after a few attempts, he turned to me and said, "Maybe you know how to break this turnstile? I think it's against me." I laughed and offered to help. It turned out that his card just needed to be activated. I explained how to register it, and he cheerfully said, "Oh, that's why it won't let me through. Well, at least now I know the subway isn't conspiring against me. Although, I'm still not sure." The man thanked me and went on his way, and I spent the rest of the day thinking about his phrase about the turnstile conspiracy. At the grocery store, I was standing in line behind a man who looked to be in his 60s. He was flipping through newspapers near the checkout when he suddenly turned to me and said, "Do you know the secret to getting rich?" I wasn't sure how to respond, so I simply said, "No, I don't." He leaned in closer and whispered, "Do you buy newspapers? No? Well, that's not the secret." He winked and added, "The real secret is simple. Don't get married, and don't get dogs. All your money will stay with you." I laughed and replied, "Well, that sounds a bit sad." He smiled back, "But it works, proven by my own experience." With that, he left the store, leaving me wondering if he was serious or just sharing some life wisdom. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any exciting new content. Hit the notification bell to get alerts for every new video. That way, you'll always stay up to date with all the latest updates. Thank you for your support, and see you in the next video.